The subject is the limitations of God. This is an important topic in relation to better understanding God and life. The definition of God typically includes the thought that he is not limited in any way. However, humankind has no correct knowledge of such things, since they are outside our realm. However, God has graciously provided many things about himself. God has defined himself as having limitations. So, how is God limited and why? We will see how his limitations are an essential part of achieving his purpose. Also, our greatly improved understanding of God will increase our appreciation of him, and also expose many of humankind's beliefs and humankind's religions as false. How can it be possible that this all-powerful being is limited, that there are things he cannot do? God reveals he cannot lie in Titus chapter 1 verse 2. How can this be? Let me suggest 3 things. First, God limits himself. Second, he can have no association with evil. Third, he cannot force people to act in certain ways after providing them with a free will. That would negate the test and be inconsistent with his righteousness. Let us step back and properly understand God's purpose. God's purpose is to share his divine nature with humankind. Of course, it begins with our creation. We are created in the image of God. In order to make independent decisions, humankind is provided a free will. In order to share in the divine nature, humankind must have an eternal character, that is, have a never-ending existence. God designs a test and a place for the test. In God's perfection, we learn that he is the absence of evil. This author wrote a book titled, God is the Perfect Absence of Evil. He did this in view of the very widespread, and terribly wrong, belief that all things, and thus evil must have originated with God. Here is a critically important distinction, namely that God, the perfect absence of evil, cannot spend eternity with evil, we can say not share eternity with sin. Dealing with God is not some random, arbitrary thing. Worship cannot be forced by God, and yet worship must be as God directs. Forced worship would be meaningless. God desires all to be saved, but he cannot force obedience. At this point, we might realize that nothing makes sense in terms of God achieving his purpose, unless humankind has a free will. Certainly, there must be a test, a perfect test, that would allow God to find qualified persons. Even more so, those who succeed must meet certain criteria. They need to be perfect. Perfection would mean they were without sin. Sin, often ridiculed by humankind, plays an essential part in God's plan, since this is how a person's character is revealed. God knows humankind will fail even in the best of conditions, such as the comfortable existence of Adam and Eve, before their sin. Can you see how God's limitations help you to understand God? God is gracious to reveal so much about himself and life. The truths of God are always encouraging as we sense God's communication with humankind. So, in what ways do we now better understand God? God is of the highest integrity. Evil is impossible for him. Humankind is indeed blessed with a Creator who desires to share his divine nature. God did not bring evil into the world. Evil did not exist until there was sin. Your eternal fate resides in your choices in relation to the Word of God. Since God cannot lie, all he inspired will come to pass. God is very objective. God declares he is not partial, and of course, that would be consistent with the absence of evil, with the highest integrity and his perfection and fairness. There was a cost to God to fulfill his purpose that includes relinquishing his control by allowing his creation to have a free will, and thus it is possible to reject God and his ways. However, the greatest cost was requiring his Son to suffer the terrible death. This visual provides some notes for clarity. Read them when you have time. However, the note in red makes a point about what is important, and it not the hundreds of things you could learn about God, but that you need to take care to follow God's directives. Understanding God's limitations explains a great deal, but all you need to do is to obey the gospel and remain faithful unto death. That needs to be your focus. These 2 books are recommended in support of this video.